I'd like to open up the meeting, special meeting for Monday, August 6th. And I think we're going into closed session.
No.
Was there something else?
No, well, actually, so thank you, Madam Mayor. Let me kind of outline what the special meeting is. So we have a study session on our Housing Nexus study and looking at commercial housing impact fees and commercial linkage
right.
fees. So we would start with that kind of study session, looking for direction from council. And then we do have a closed session as well. And the closed session is a conference about existing litigation, and that is for pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 cases Carla against the City of Sonoma and the Sonoma. We will want to take public comment before we go into the closed session if we get to that point. If the housing impacts, the study session takes longer, then we can continue and do the closed session at the end of the regular meeting. With that, I will turn it, unless there's anything else, back to the council.
Yeah, I think we're going into the closed session.
How long is the closed session going to take?
Less than 15 minutes.
Was there some reason we shouldn't do it first?
There's no reason. It's really the pleasure of the council. The agenda could be moved around, so.
I say we go into closed session.
So let's do public comment then on the closed session item first.
And I'll open for public comments. Okay, there are none, so I'll close for public comments and we'll go into closed session.
For members of the audience, looks like we'll be out hopefully in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
special closed session meeting? No. That's what it says here.
Thank you, Mayor. And
Study
Councilmember,
session? What are we
we met in closed session with the council, and we have nothing to report out at this time. And so we'll now move into the study session about our housing impact fee.
Thank you. And what I'm going to do is forego the Pledge of Allegiance as we do this. So at this point, I'd like to ask for a roll call, please.
Councilmember Harrington, or Vice Mayor Harrington,
Present.
Councilmember Edwards,
Yes.
Councilmember Cook,
Here.
Councilmember Hunley. Here. Mayor Agramonte.
Here.
Thank you.
So, okay. Okay, so I think we're going now into housing, right? Okay. Is there anything else at this point? I think she did. That's all right.
So if you're ready, Madam Mayor,
Yes, oh God, yeah.
we're going to go to continued review, discussion, and possible action on a housing nexus study addressing housing impact fees and commercial linkage fees, as well as potential related changes to the city's inclusionary housing program.
And maybe before Mr. Goodison starts, just one item. Mayor, council member, the thought process on this is to kind of walk through a table and get your input. But before we walk through the table, I think it may be, because we're going to kind of go through piece by piece, it might be good to do public comment before we go through the individual, because I think council will be giving direction on individual items, and it'd be good to hear from members of the public before we get to that point. So David, if there's any general opening that you'd like to provide, but then again, I would suggest we get public comment before we start doing the work through the table.
Very well. I'll just provide some quick background because we want to get this in front of the council for discussion just as quickly as possible. The city is engaged in the process of developing housing impact fees, and these would be fees that would be levied potentially against various types of commercial and residential development with the revenue dedicated to housing programs. Under state law, the development of such impact fees has to be validated through a nexus study demonstrating that the proposed fees are reasonably related to development impacts. That is a rather technical exercise, and so to assist us in that effort, we've retained the consultant team of Kaiser Marston and Karen Warner and Associates, and we have Harriet Rogozin of Kaiser Marston with us tonight to help out with questions if they come up. So today we've developed a residential housing impact fee analysis, a commercial housing impact fee analysis, recommended ranges of fee levels and thresholds, recommendations for updating the city's inclusionary program, and a variety of context material. We most recently reviewed this with the City Council at your meeting of March 19th. And at that time, the Council provided consensus direction addressing many of the key discussion points that we need to resolve before a fee ordinance can be established. But Council direction in certain areas was deferred, pending the preparation by staff of revenue estimates associated with the fee ranges identified in the council discussion. So we've developed those estimates, and we just wanted to provide a quick overview of the results before moving into the public comment section and then council direction. So on the screen before you is a set of revenue scenarios. These are based on development that Sonoma experienced over the last 4.5 years. So they're not projections as such, they're looking back. And these revenue scenarios or estimates are divided into different categories that these fees would apply to. So for example, fees would apply to a new single-family unit potentially. And in the range of fee options that the council has been discussing, revenues from those fees annually might range from $90,000 to $135,000. In addition, these fees might apply to an addition to a single-family home. Now, the council didn't want to penalize additions to single-family homes, so at the most recent discussion that you had back in March, it was suggested by Councilmember Harrington that these fees might apply only to additions that result in a home size of 2,800 square feet or larger. And so we took that direction, and based on that idea, and again looking back at what's happened in the past, the revenue estimate there is a little less than $4,000 per year. Multifamily development new ranges from $3,500 to $11,000. annually. I want to point out that in each of these different residential categories, these fees only apply to developments that aren't already subject to the city's inclusionary housing requirements. So these are developments or projects that would not be providing inclusionary housing. So if a multifamily development did provide an inclusionary housing, it would not be subject to this per square footage fee, but it would be subject to the in lieu fractional fee, which is also on the table. And that fee would apply, for example, to a project in which 4 1/4 inclusionary units were required. So right now, we would get 4 of those units, but we wouldn't get the 0.25. So there is a limited amount of revenue associated with that source, probably no more than $4,000 per year. Moving on to commercial, we did have some hotel development over the last 4.5 years, namely the Marino Hotel on West Napa Street. That project would have resulted in a fee ranging from $11,000 to $17,000 per year, again based on the fee amounts that the council has been discussing, which in that case range from $6 to $9 per square foot. For other commercial development, the council has talked about fees of $4 to $7 per square foot. That would be retail, office, restaurant. And over the last 4.5 years, that would have amounted to $6,000 to $11,000 annually in fees. So we provided those out both as an annual average and as a 5-year total to get a sense of what could be accumulated over time. So we hope that in the upcoming discussion of council decision points that this information is helpful. And with that, I guess I'd like to turn it back to the mayor so we can hear from the public in case, of course, there are any questions.
You're very astute. Do we have any questions before I take it out to the public?
Could you explain to me your calculation for hotel and what that was based on? These 11,000, 17,000, 17,000?
Well, it was really based on 99% of a single project. I think that we had an addition to a bed and breakfast, but it was this is the fee that would have applied to the Marino Hotel based on its size. That's a 7-unit hotel project that is under construction now on West Napa Street.
Okay. I thought you were saying the West Napa Hotel.
Oh, no,
That
no.
didn't make any sense.
Sorry.
Got it.
Are there any questions? None. I'd like to take it out to the public.
All right. Hi, Logan Harvey, 578 Estimadera Drive. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves when we're talking about housing impact fees is really what's the purpose of doing them in the first place? Do we want to create a viable solution to a housing problem that we have? Do we want to create an opportunity for council to have proactive solutions to housing problems, to be able to offer money to either make projects more viable or to, say, offer down payment assistance or help with homelessness? Or do we want to give the appearance of such a program? And I think that's really important to consider as we look at what the costs are associated with including a housing fee. When you're talking about a hotel or a commercial development, especially when you're looking at, service industry jobs and things like that, you're bringing in people that can't afford to live here, and you're bringing more of them in. And the purpose of a housing fee there is to say, okay, we're going to charge you money because you're not providing housing for your workers. That's going to impact the city in the way that it's going to bring more traffic. It's going to bring more problems to our city. In this case, we have to make sure that we are charging enough to actually solve that problem. Because if we're not charging enough to solve that problem, then we've really done nothing. And there was no reason to charge that housing impact fee. We've just garnered $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to do what with? The other point that I would make is that I think this is kind of a side point, but we brought it up, right, with multifamily units not being charged if they have the inclusionary 20%. I think it's pretty clear, and you'll see this in the project that we have tonight, that our inclusionary units are too low at 20%. We don't need 20/80 projects that are 20% affordable and 80% market rate. We have a lack of affordable housing here for workers making at 80% AMI, 100% AMI, 120% AMI, 150% AMI. And what we're offering them is 20% affordable and 80% market rate, which they cannot afford. So we're continually not solving the problem. We're not addressing our building code and our planning codes to increase the inclusionary context, and we're also not looking at revenue scenarios for our in lieu of fee that are high enough to actually address the problem. And I think that's really what should be on council's mind tonight. There is a housing crisis. There's a massive affordability crisis in town, and we need to start addressing it in a serious manner. We need a serious plan to fix this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey.
Good evening, City Council and staff. I'd like to second just about everything that Logan said. I agree with. The housing impact fee, the object is to have the development pay for the housing needs that it creates, like Logan said, and that's what the Nexus study is. So it's reasonably related to development impacts. So that seems like that's classic weasel word phrase, reasonably related to. I think I could make a lot of hay out of that one in the future. But, you know, so that leaves it up to your judgment about what's reasonably related to development impacts. So I think that, like Logan said, the City Council and the city needs to take a stand to hold back the tide of the market rate exclusion and displacement of people who already live here and people who can't get in. So the moat just seems to be getting bigger, and the Nexus study is something that's supposed to maybe narrow the moat so people can stay here and maybe get into Sonoma. And so I would like to see that this Nexus fee or the housing impact fee actually make some difference in this regard, and that the City Council make a stand on that. And where is the stand going to be? It has to be somewhere. Is it going to be here? And where is it that it's going to make a difference on the housing issue? So I would just like to see a nice big game-changing three-pointer out of the council on something like this. And I don't know if you can do it on this, but do it on something. And look to shoot that three-pointer, and don't be nervous to take the shot, because, you know, they don't all go in, but if you hit one and it's a game changer, it's good. And as far as the inclusionary requirement, I'm not sure if that's up for debate this evening, but if it is, I would say raise it to 35%, or I agree with Logan that if you had a requirement, you know, make it on a scale of 20% at certain percent AMI, another 20% on the scale of AMI, so that you have your housing developments that aren't 80-20, but they're like 20-20-20, and then let market rate have 40% or something like that. So you have a more fair spread, and you encourage the kind of demographic that the Nexus study is supposed to be trying to create. So the Nexus study probably won't generate, or the housing impact fee won't generate the kind of money that will make a big difference, but it could make a difference in some small potato person's life if they could get some assistance here or there. So I would look at being inventive and innovative with the inclusionary requirement, and I think my time's about up. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Alabak.
Norma Barnett, 637 5th Street East. This notice of this special meeting was distributed Friday afternoon, which I found a little bit strange because of the importance of the issue of affordable housing to the city of Sonoma, and to the people who work here and want to live here, or have lived here for many years and want to continue to live here. Unless you think that I was sitting around eating bonbons and watching YouTube. I was having heart surgery on Wednesday, so that's my excuse. I hope you consider it a good one for not acting on this further and keeping on top of what was happening here. Had I known, I would have done much more to prepare for this meeting and to get more people here, because it's such a significant issue. The public interest notice about something of this significance and importance should not happen at this short notice, especially since this was discussed in March And there was plenty of opportunity to discuss it before. And if I understand it correctly, I may be wrong about this, we would have to, you would have a chance to discuss it in the future. A decision does not need to be rushed into tonight. I want to make some general remarks because I'm not the expert yet, as other people are, but I support everything that Logan and Fred have spoken to already. In reading the report, the primary thing that seemed to be brought up as the reason for putting these particular new regulations or into effect has to do with encouraging the development in the city of Sonoma. Now, I did some research in terms of looking at how Sonoma stood with other cities in California in regard to development, as well as other costs, and it stacks up this way. Paying for utilities in the town of Sonoma, as somebody residing here, is the same as the average other city in California. Paying for food in the town of Sonoma, city of Sonoma, is about $18 on the average, higher, or a percent, I'm not sure which it is, higher. Health costs are $16 or percent higher than the average in the state of California. Housing in Sonoma is $365 or percent higher than other counties on the average in the state of California. So the developers seem to be doing just fine. It doesn't seem to me that they need to be encouraged to build. They need to be encouraged to build affordable housing, and I consider it the job of the city and the staff and the city council to make that encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Barnett? Is there anyone else that would like to?
Good evening, Council. Chris Petlock, 426 Napa Road, Sonoma. So I would like to echo the previous speaker's comments on the timing of this meeting, the notice for this meeting. This is a very important topic, and I'm sure a lot of other folks would like to be here to speak on this, but not everybody can get out at 4:30 in the afternoon. And this is a topic that has been being discussed for a very long time. I'm just not sure why the urgency all of a sudden to have it turned around so quickly on a Monday afternoon. On this, these are all one-time fees. When I looked at this and I compared the fees that were being proposed against the last general plan, which basically laid out, the available square foot for development at that time, I would say that these 5 years numbers are pretty much all that would ever happen out of these impact fees. There's just not a lot left to develop here. So if this is the plan for Housing Trust Fund, I'm not sure it's going to go very far or have much of an impact. I strongly encourage this council to find other ongoing methods and more stable funding for housing for people here in town that need it, and assistance for people here in town that need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petlock. Do we have anyone else who would like to speak? Seeing no one. Oh, boy. Right to the 11th hour. Thank you.
What about the 11th hour? I think it's it's 4:30 in there, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I Matthew Sipple. I live at 734 First Street West. I could not agree more with the last two speakers. The timing of this agenda item is absolutely ridiculous. The notice from last Friday for such an important issue to be held at 4:30 in the afternoon, where, as Mr. Petlock confirmed, I mean, the availability of folks that live here and want to speak is completely diminished. This is an incredibly important issue. I've dealt with affordable housing and impact fees for over 2 decades. This is such an important issue. I cannot encourage you enough to have further discussion on this item. I think it warrants it beyond belief. I would say that the affordable housing issue or the impact fees are very much a tax on the middle class, and I would encourage you to think of not just the lower income families, but also the middle class. Let me just give you an example of that. I mean, some of the fees you're talking about are $10 to $15 per square foot. If you do the math on an 1,800 square foot home, that's a net fee of $27,000 per house, which means that the developer has to go at least up to $35,000 or $40,000 to recoup that. So what happens is that fee gets transferred across. It artificially raises the price of middle-income homes throughout the community. It does that by two methods. Number one is when you develop, and that loss that you take for each home, which is typically between $250,000 and $350,000 per home. It's a loss. You spread that over every other home and raise the price of those homes. So once those homes are built and completed, the homes that are next door afterwards get valued at a similar price. So it artificially pushes everything up. I mean, I think that these types of things need to be taken into consideration. I mean, I couldn't agree with Mr. Petlock more that further areas of study need to be given to long-term solutions to this. And I think that is incredible. I would encourage you to do very much the same. This is a very, very important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tippel. Is there anyone else who would like to approach the podium? I will close the public session and ask to our city manager if you've heard anything that you might want to answer for our public.
So I think as council and community knows, this has been an issue that has been of importance. The last time we talked about this was March, based on a variety of other workload issues for planning staff. Hasn't been able to kind of come forward. For staff's perspective, again, this is another study session, and then from the direction we get to council, we will be drafting documents that will come back. There will still be an additional time in front of council for both the ordinance and resolutions. So this is not the last time that there will be public. So this is really set up as an additional study session. I think, frankly, part of the impetus and the timing was wanting to have Mr. Goodison, who's been the project manager, been doing the work on this, be able to come with a consultant, provide the last recommendations, get information from council, hear feedback, and then consultants will be able to go forward and do that work. And again, there'll be additional time for public comment and outreach. So that was part of the impetus with just the council's schedule that we've had with an appeal tonight. This was a way to kind of try to have this back in front of the community and get some input, and then continue to try to move this forward without losing another couple months, because it could have been another couple months in terms of getting our new planning director up to speed in order to move this forward. So that was part of staff's understanding. Understand it's not perfect, but again, we felt like it was important to continue to move this forward.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? And I have something for for David. So in San Francisco, I understand they have a rate of 35%, but that's to build housing for teachers. Do you know anything about that, David?
I may have to defer to our consultant on that issue. I would just point out that as expensive as land is in Sonoma, it's far more expensive in San Francisco,
Right.
and it's more possible to support a higher requirement. But do you have any insight into that?
That you're referring to with the teachers, but the San Francisco's program is under consideration and under being revised continuously, and they're trying, and their program varies by neighborhood. They have.
I don't know, is the microphone on?
Says it's on.
Sorry.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, great.
So I'm not sure the program that you're referring to with the teachers, but the city of San Francisco is very frequently revising and examining their program. And so I'm not sure the teacher, that aspect of it. It also varies significantly by neighborhood, and they're trying to figure out the balance for that city, which is probably very different than what would be appropriate in Sonoma.
So with that 35%, what would that look like? Would that be funding from outside sources?
I don't know the specifics of that
Okay.
proposal.
All right, thank you.
So if it's okay with the mayor, I would just like to just complete the lead into the decision points. Is that
I think we
Would
have
that
a
be acceptable?
question. Oh, all right. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So moving on, just one more word about these fee scenarios. I just want to give a little bit of perspective about how they would apply to specific projects. So for a 2,500 square foot residence, the fee range under discussion right now is $17,500 to $26,250. Again, just based on the fee ranges that the council has discussed to date. The fee applicable to the recent expansion of this Index Tribune building, which was a little over 4,000 square feet, would range from $17,000 to almost $30,000, again, based on the ranges that are under discussion. I would just add in response to public comment that I don't believe that there's anything in this staff report about encouraging or development in general, but I think it's a fair point to make that there does need to be a sweet spot in these fees, because certainly the income to support housing programs is important. It's needed. This would be one piece of the puzzle, not all of it by far, but it would be an important piece potentially. But at the same time, if fees are set too high, then you don't end up collecting any fees. So, and I also did want to just point out where we stand today in meeting our regional housing needs assessment, just to provide a little bit of context. This is for the planning period of 2015 to 2023. And just in terms of what's in the pipeline right now, this is only one measure of addressing housing needs, but it is a measure that is quantified. We are actually exceeding our requirements at the extremely low and very low income level and at the moderate income level. And obviously the market rate level does take care of itself. But right now we're trailing in the low income level by about 9 units. So with that, I think I'd like to just go on to the discussion points.
David?
Yes.
I'm sorry, we do have a question from Vice Mayor Harrington.
Do any of these fees apply to the Gateway project, which is after this?
Well, that's a great question. It really depends on how the ordinance is defined. So right now, the Gateway project involves the demolition of about 6,000 square feet of commercial area, if you will, and its replacement with about 3,500 square feet of commercial area. That said, that area that's proposed for demolition has been unused for many years now, and so depending on how the ordinance is written, you could say, well, there's going to be less commercial opportunity there, so they don't pay a fee, or that this is alternatively essentially new construction because of just the aging out of what they're replacing. So it's a policy choice for the council.
I guess, sorry, at what point does the fee apply? Does it attach at the time of your application or the time your application is approved, or do the fees attach at the time you start construction? When do you?
It would be a building permit fee in essence, although the council, as part of this discussion, has talked about allowing the fee to be paid prior to occupancy. But basically, it's based on your building permit, because that's when we can validate for sure just what's being built in terms of the area.
Thank you, David. Did you have a question, Gary?
So David, can you put the RENA numbers back up, please?
Well, I hope I can. Let's see.
If you can, it's okay. I think we were off 9 on the low income.
That's right.
So, and I know in our discussions with fees, and Vice Mayor Harrington brought up the issue on 2,800 square foot homes and keeping people that want to stay here and provide extra space, accelerate dwelling units, that sort of thing. To hit those numbers, To me, I agree with one of the speakers that talked about just it adds to the fees and the cost. And if it's $27,000 more, if you amortize that over a 30-year note, I can't do that math in my head. It's a lot of money. I would be thinking that we should have something in this proposal where we offer an incentive to developers that want to build some of these units, that maybe we can catch up with that 9 units that we're under. And clearly we need more numbers. The project coming up later has, I think, 10 or something in that unit, but it's not, I don't think that's ties in with the low, I'm not sure. But I think we should be also thinking, instead of just asking people for more money and taxing them, the numbers that you had on the first chart, the inflation rate of housing costs here, it's never really going to catch up in my assessment from just the way that I look at those types of numbers. So I would be leaning more towards finding a way to incentivize developers to build the units that we need to and take our inventory of city-owned land, that sort of thing, and create that nexus to develop these homes. I know we've got a few spots around still. But I think we come up with a fair number. I don't think it should be projects that are in the building process right now, because their numbers, people are starting to sell those and so on, and to add another fee on top of something that's already in progress doesn't make sense to me. If I were a developer, I'd be arguing that. But I think we need to come up with something. But I don't think, even if we came up with $1 million a year, it's or whatever, the $100,000 a year in 5 years, $1 million is not going to really buy anything in my assessment. So.
And when you mention that, you're saying with respect to incentives?
Well, I'd love to see some sort of incentive for a developer to come in. I mean, we put a lot of hurdles in front of developers in this town. And if we could find a way to say, all right, we've got X land, here's a creative opportunity, somebody who wants to be benevolent towards Sonoma to do something. There's a couple of spots on Broadway still, et cetera, where people would love to do it, but they feel like there's such a hurdle in this town to get anything done. I'll bet we could find some of those types of developers to come in and build something and maybe give an incentive to people rather than charging them more fees, maybe charge them less to build those 9 units we need. So.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, David?
So I guess I have a question with what Councilmember Edwards said. Is there, and this is probably for the consultant, is there any cities that are looking at a net zero on, this money is going somewhere, and when you start looking at incentive programs, is there a way that other cities have tackled this? We're trying to make it possibly a net zero. You're taking the $400,000 that Councilmember Edwards is talking about, and it's kind of in this little pool that is helping to subsidize for some of these incentives that were mentioned.
There she goes.
I understand the question, but I think the idea is that the money that would be collected from the projects that are below the threshold of providing the units on site would then be used in projects where the city could leverage other funding sources for affordable housing, for example, the tax credit program. So that money would not be filling the entire affordability gap that was referred to earlier. So it would be leveraged multiple times so that it could create more units at other affordability levels. So I'm not sure if this answers your question, but it's the in lieu fee or impact fee revenue that would be generated would be used towards affordable housing needs that are not addressed in the on-site inclusionary program, which are moderate units and depending on what you decide, potentially low-income rental units. I'm not sure. Did I understand your question?
That kind of answers it. I guess what happens a lot of times in business or in government is if there's a formula attached to certain issues where later on everybody will forget about this conversation that we had today, and it sounds like there's a couple council members that really feel that when we're looking at incentives, we're not talking about incentives for the major big houses. We're talking about the way that this city can end up putting, at some point we're going to have a fund that hopefully we'll have a fund that will help housing needs here in Sonoma. And every time we pass something like this, if there's a way that we can put a formula together that's not forgotten about, that just doesn't go into the general fund and then bleeds out somewhere else, where it would go back into this to have people understand.
Well, I just want to add a couple of things about incentives. Again, there are incentives that are built into this program. ADUs would not be subject to any fee. Projects that provide inclusionary units aren't going to be subject to a fee except for a fractional in lieu fee, because they're going to be providing their inclusionary housing component. There are certainly other kinds of development related incentives that the city council could consider, but they're going to be outside of the scope of setting the housing impact fee and the inclusionary ordinance. So that's not to say that you couldn't or shouldn't discuss incentives for affordable housing. You absolutely should. But this, again, is just one piece of the puzzle.
So two other points that may be valuable. To Councilmember Cook's point, the funds, fees that are collected as part of a development impact fee program are actually required by AB 1600 to be segregated. So they cannot be combined with general fund fees and spent for other purposes. They have to be spent for the purpose for which they are collected. So there's a separate accountability that happens as a result of that. As respects incentives, there is potentially an opportunity, just sort of off the cuff, and one thing that you could consider when you actually adopt the ordinance is whether or not you want to allow most fee ordinances in this regard address provide housing or pay the fee. So there may be an opportunity for, say, in mixed-use projects, for the commercial component to buy down an extra unit, as a for instance, as a way of providing in the housing project an additional one or two or however many the fee would otherwise be, rather than just paying the fee directly, so that the housing gets built, if you will, or the affordability gets built in when the project is initially undertaken, as opposed to going into a city fee fund and then having to be paid out again later. So there are opportunities for you to build into the program itself, when the program is actually adopted, some of those alternative ways of satisfying.
But in the meantime, our first area where we're looking for council direction has to do with residential for sale fee levels. Again, this would apply to projects of 1 to 4 units. The options under discussion involve a sliding scale ranging from $4 a square foot up to $10 a square foot, to a scale that would cap out at $15 per square foot. And again, just to use the one example in the staff report for a 2,500 square foot residence, that range represents 17,500 based on the sliding scale developed by the consultants, to 26,250 at the higher range that's more consistent with what's being charged by the city of Santa Rosa.
So I think did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to say, just like in terms, I mean, I'm happy to be working on this, but in terms of putting the cart before the horse, we talk about putting everything into a fund, but we haven't had the discussion publicly or in a subcommittee about what the purpose of the fund would be, how it would work, or anything about the Housing Trust Fund, which I think was mentioned at public comment, but also I think is part of David's question, which is now we're collecting this money, but we're talking about collecting the money before we talked about what we want to use it for. When are we having that discussion? That's my question.
So I'm going to be looking at the next kind of 90 days for council, the agenda, putting some things together. So I can't tell you at this moment. I think it's going to take some time, even once we get direction from council here. We've got to write this up in kind of a fee resolution. It's got to come back. And so I think there's time for us to work with the subcommittee and put together kind of the parameters and look at some other best practices. Staff's done a little bit of research to look at what those might look like in some other places, but so those need to come back and probably could come back together.
Yeah, it'd be great to have the final discussion on this and what we plan to do with it together. So.
And I think I know what you're going to say.
I'm going to surprise you. I think part of the problem is that, so I think March 2017 was when we talked about this, correct? So it's been a while, and it's been a long time since we talked about like the policy reasons that we were talking about these fees. Like we got to the point where we were talking about numbers, and then sort of this lapse. I don't know, things might have changed with the way people feel about all of this. But before we get into the specifics, I just wanted to say that one, these fees are calculated based on, the fact that building things has an impact on our housing. These aren't just like, penalties we put on development because we're trying to squeeze money out of them. It's because when you build a hotel, you burden the housing market, and so we are, since we are short of housing, we are trying to get people to pay a very small percentage of the burden that they're putting on our housing market. And you can just see, I think, the range given for the hotels was like up to $90 a square foot, which nobody actually does. So these aren't just like having a discussion of saying it's sort of like penalizing. No, it's just recognizing that everything has a cost. Somebody has to bear it. And if nobody does, then you're just going to, squeeze out all of your workforce. The other thing I was going to say, sort of maybe my fellow council members will keep in mind, there was some comments about hurting the middle class in this process. So there was an article in the North Bay Business Journal a couple months ago about the middle class in the North Bay. Middle class is sometimes considered between 67 and 200% of the average median income. And they had Santa Rosa, which middle class in Santa Rosa ranges from $42,000 a year to $125,000 a year. And if you look at the 30% threshold for what is considered rent burdened is anything over 30, and that means monthly between $1,000 a month and $3,100 a month. So like thinking about sort of like these fees and relating to like these people, like we're not even talking about the same thing here. So if you with houses we're building any house where someone making $1,000 to $3,100 a month can pay. So I just don't think that you can't conflate these two things in your head. On the incentive side, since nobody's building things for our middle class, this is how you do it. Things that are requiring more workforces, which is all of our more expensive homes, because they all are putting a burden on the workforce in terms of housing. So if you want people to build this, you don't have a fee, and if you want people to pay their share of the burden, then you put a fee. So that's how I see it. And so my numbers are based on, is it going to be something that's actually beneficial to the city, something that we need, which for me it is based on the middle class and our workforce and the kind of housing that they live in. And if it's not, then I think that they need to pay their share of it.
So when we discussed how, people sort of smirk with the Housing Trust Fund, this, and I think we said I think Rachel and I were going to be looking at different methodologies with respect to something like this. So maybe what you just said, there's some room in here for that. I don't know. I think there's a cynicism that there won't be enough money, but, possibly there can be as we move forward.
Well, I think this being a tiny little piece of the puzzle, and I do think that we need to figure out how we're going to spend this money, but the problem is, which I think we see today, is like, we don't all see our housing issues the same way, and so even deciding what we're going to spend our money on is a challenge when you don't see things the same way. So I think that knowing that we're going to do this fund, and then finding multiple sources of revenue, this will be like a little one. And then when we have this cohesive strategy of what do we want to incentivize? How are we going to do it? How are we going to pay for it? Then we can have a plan. Everything that we set with this can be changed. We could set fees for everything. And then once we figure out what we want to incentivize, change it. So I see that this just needs to get started. And obviously we've been working on this for a long time. So I think that even if today isn't perfect, it's something to work on, and then we can figure out exactly what we're trying to do.
But the idea is still out there.
So
Mr. Edwards?
Yeah, my comments were, because we're on the page for residential, we haven't gotten to the commercial yet, so my comments are based on residential conversation here, because I know we've talked about commercial development fees and so on in lieu fees, and I figured that will come in a later slide.
Well, I just would say that, as suggested by Councilmember Hundley, this is, a piece of a larger puzzle. It's something that hopefully we can build on and fine tune over the years. The fee studies that have been prepared provide a structure for doing that, so that in the future you do have a variety of options. But in the meantime, I think that it would be useful progress for the city to pursue the development of an impact fee ordinance, recognizing that there are a lot of conversations to be held in the future about housing needs and how to meet them, because it's, until we get this in place, no funds whatsoever are collected. So again, we can work through the slides, or if the council has a different way that you would like to go, we're happy to take whatever direction we get. Thank you.
I think we could just move forward. Is that what you're asking? Okay.
So again, our first area of question has to do with residential for sale fee levels. So far, we've been looking at two options: a sliding scale beginning at $4 a square foot per 1,000 square feet, up to $10 a square foot, capping out at that level at a 4,000 square foot unit, to a higher scale that would cap out at $15 a square foot. That's more in line with what is happening in Santa Rosa. So those are the two options that the council asked us to study in terms of their impacts and revenue potential.
Yes.
Oh, so with regard to the, sorry to just keep asking this, but since it's about to happen, with regard to the Broadway project that's next, their units are not for sale, they're for lease. How would their affordable units are for lease, not for sale. How would that be affected by decisions here about for lease or for sale?
Okay, well, two things. First, I probably didn't set this up very well because this has to do, well, okay, that's true. This has to do with the single family side of things. But to answer your question, the Broadway project is going to be subject, or would be, well, it is subject to the city's inclusionary requirement. And any project that it's providing inclusionary units isn't going to be paying the fee because they're providing the units that we're asking for, except for the fractional fee.
I thought we were deciding tonight whether they had to be for sale or for lease.
Oh, that's a different question area, but I think we got your direction on that one. I think the direction was that in a for sale project, the inclusionary units need to be for sale.
Yeah.
And then in a rental project, they need to be for rent.
Right.
In a project like the Broadway project that has both, then presumably if that requirement was in place, then it would be proportionate.
No, I mean, if the Broadway project is approved tonight, their current plans are for lease, but we are giving direction that they should be for sale for that type of project. What would happen to that specific project?
Well, it depends on, I guess, when you adopted the ordinance and how it was written. I mean, many times an ordinance like this applies moving forward, but it's up to the council to establish that set of parameters in terms of what projects it's going to apply to based on where they are in the process.
Thanks.
So what direction are we moving right now?
Well, right now I was just looking for feedback on residential for sale fee levels.
I have some feedback. So I see it's the sliding scale. I think even, well, because I think that ultimately we want to encourage people to build smaller, but so starting small for really small and going up to 10 for big houses, I think sounds really reasonable. So I would support that.
So would I.
That was at the $10 cap?
And I'd be fine with that.
I'm comfortable with that.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, I'm okay
Gary?
with it. It's and then on the sliding scale, and that's determined based on size.
That's exactly right. Smaller units pay less.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next up, this has to do with rental on-site requirements for inclusionary units. So the suggestion from the consultants had been that for rental projects, that the inclusionary requirement be set at 15% at low income. And in the council discussion, there really wasn't agreement on that particular recommendation, and we got alternative recommendations suggesting that the requirement for inclusionary units remain at 20% of the total number of units provided, and then that be split between units provided at the low income level and at the moderate income level. So this choice really doesn't have anything to do with fee levels. It's just a policy issue in terms of what types of affordable units, inclusionary units, the council wants rental projects to provide.
I have a question. Do you know off the top of your head the current Sonoma County limits for rent for like a 1 and a 2 bedroom based on?
I can bring them up, but I apologize, I don't know them off the top of my head.
Because last time I looked, although it's starting to separate right now, I feel like at least for the moderate income, it's closer to where market rate is now, but I don't think it's always going to be like that. So I think it is important to have a category for people who make moderate income. And I think last time I had talked about Palo Alto, who has affordable housing for people who make 120% of the AMI because their doctors and lawyers can't afford to live there. So I like the idea of splitting it, because even though we also need low, I feel like there'll be a missing middle if we don't put it in.
Okay, and I want to say that even without the numbers in front of me, I can tell you that you're quite correct. Right now, at the moderate income level, the rent allowances are close to market. But that's not always true. That hasn't always been true in the past, and I'm sure you're right that it will not always be true in the future.
Are there any other comments from the council?
I have a question for Councilmember Hundley. So is moderate to you is 120% of AMI? Is that what you're talking about? Or what's the number?
I don't remember off the top of my head. Well, moderate is it's an established thing. It's not my
Well,
word.
Well, the moderate income in the moderate income band, in terms of households, the upper limit is 120%. In
And what's
terms of the
lower?
rents that would be established at the moderate income level, the level that we would recommend is 110%.
Well, and what's the percentage between low and moderate? Like, what's the lower end of moderate? It goes from what to 120%? Because then is it a range? Oh,
80.
80 to 120. Yeah, so that's kind of like a big chunk of, I don't know, sort of a young professional crowd, I feel.
And I guess another way to push that would be to set the rent threshold at 100%.
What is the pleasure of this council? So you're suggesting the 80 to 110?
Well, I think the choices are we can either leave it at all low or have it where it's partial, moderate, partial, low.
Well, this is going to be a change no matter what, because right now rental projects are only required to provide 20% at the moderate income level.
Oh, okay. Got it. So it goes the other way. So we want to add half for low or some percentage, which I don't think it should be all moderate because a lot of people couldn't even afford, or a lot of people wouldn't qualify for that or afford it.
Oh, I would definitely support a 50-50 blend, moderate and low.
Likewise.
I would agree.
Sounds like you have a majority.
Thank you. Next. So this would be the fee level for rental projects of 4 units or fewer. That is projects that aren't subject to the inclusionary requirement. So similar to someone building a single-family home, we've demonstrated through the Nexus study that even someone building a multifamily home has an impact on affordable housing and could be subject to a housing impact fee if that was deemed appropriate by the City Council. So in previous discussions, the fee levels under discussion by the council have been ranged from $3 per square foot to $9 per square foot. And in council comments from the previous meeting of March 2018, Councilmember Harrington was interested in setting the fee close to the cost of providing the units on site. And I believe that the question was asked what is the highest fee level that could be charged? And that's actually $22.10 a square foot. Councilmember Cook and Agramonte spoke of potentially supporting fees in the area of $5.50 per square foot, while Councilmember Hundley preferred fees at the lower end of the range.
So this one I think I remember being confused by. So what distinguishes a 1-unit rental from a 1-unit for sale? Because when you build it, isn't it just the same thing, and then you can decide what you do with it? So
well, it should probably say 2 to 4 units. My apologies.
So like a duplex.
Yeah. A duplex, triplex, fourplex.
Well, I think this is something I would love to see less single-family homes and more duplexes and triplexes. So I think that's why I picked the $3 last time, because I think that encouraging sort of little bundles of houses is better. So I think I'm going to stick with my 3.
I like the 550. It was kind of in the middle of that on our last discussion, so I would kind of stick to that point.
I'm not big on fees, so I'll let you guys go.
I guess I could agree to 550, I suppose.
I feel we have 3 council members that support 550. Is that what I'm hearing? Myself as well.
Okay.
I have a question though. On the, it's not related to that vote. On the prior item, there were 2 topics. One was the ratio, and the second was the on-site obligation. Do we need to talk about
Well,
that?
I feel like the direction, unless I heard it differently, was that there was no interest in suspending the on-site obligation. That the council wants to get those inclusionary units.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Okay.
Just a quick question, Mayor and council members. So we have 3 more items to review with you on this, but it is 6 o'clock for the regular meeting. Is the council's preference to finish this special meeting item? You can always continue this to the end of your regular meeting if that's the preference of the council too. So just want to do a time check.
What's the time check on this? What do you think?
Well, you've been making good progress since we got to the table and working through it. You've made some good progress. We can proceed for a little longer, and if it starts to maybe go too long, then we may need to stop and continue.
I would
So-
like to continue.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, the next issue relates to exemptions to the ordinance. So as we've already mentioned, deed restricted units, accessory dwelling units, farm working units are all exempt from this ordinance. And it appears that the council has reached consensus on the proposal that additions to home sizes only be charged if they result in an increase of 2,800 square feet or greater. So at this point, with that concept seeming to have council consensus, the only issue is the fee level that would be applied to these residential additions. Again, these are residential additions that would result in an increase in the total area of the house to be over 2,800 square feet. And so the consultant recommendation was to put the fee at $4 per square foot on the amount of new space over that threshold number of 2,800 square feet, and then apply the sliding scale if that addition was greater than 1,000 square feet.
That sounds good.
That's fine for me.
Wait, so it's based on the size of the addition?
Yeah.
So is this where we were talking last time about the 2,800 square feet number, about
Right.
make it bigger?
Right.
See, I just don't think so, because I mean, this is happening everywhere, that everyone's building these small houses and they're just flipping them into huge houses and selling them for twice as much. So I think that if someone's going to take away one of what used to be our starter homes, and I don't think that the fee should be as if it was a small house, because they're basically doubling the house. So I don't think I would support that way.
Well, the other option would be to simply apply the sliding scale based on. So, for example, if you're starting out at 2,800 square feet, you would start the sliding scale at 2,800 square feet. That would be the other option.
Because that would make sense to me, because if we're doing a sliding scale for building them in the first place, and so you like build a little house and it's a low fee, and then you wait, and then you build an addition with the same low fee, rather than if you just built the whole thing at once, then you'd be paying a bigger fee the whole time, right? If it's a sliding scale, so you're building a 1,000 square foot house, and you're paying the $4.
Right.
And then a year later, you build your 1,000 square foot addition and you pay your $4. Or you could build a 2,000 square foot house and the fee would be higher.
It was still under the math you did.
Only a crazy person would rebuild their house in a year.
I'm not saying rebuilding, we're talking about additions.
So
That too.
what you would do, I think, if I understood this correctly, would be you would charge the fee based on the total size of the house, then multiplied by the addition.
Yes.
So if you had a 3,000 square foot house that you added 1,500 square feet to, it becomes a 4,500 square foot house. So it's getting charged the $10
charged
per
at the
square
highest
feet
level.
on the
On the
1,500
addition.
square feet. on the addition.
Under that option. I mean, but in previous discussions, the council has seemingly not wanted to place, or was cautious about how much of a fee it wanted to charge someone doing a residential addition. But those are basically the two options.
Well, I liked last time where it was the 2,800 square feet threshold for charging the fee, because it like let people sort of get into a house and it grow with them a little bit, but then it's not the same as getting a little house and flipping it into something twice as big.
Oh, I think that's what we're talking about. We're saying that people buy a home and then, and I actually personally think it's like the epitome of a middle class dream, that you buy a home and then as you are able to over time save your money or your home increases in value, that you can expand that home to accommodate the things that you want to have. And there is an extremely tight market for moving up. And so for people, I mean, there are plenty of people in Sonoma that have been able to purchase a home, and I think it's pretty burdensome to put new construction costs on a current homeowner who just wants to have a larger living room, or they have an additional child and they want to have a bedroom for that kid. And I think starting the additional fees at $2,800 is fair. I think it's good.
Square feet? Or dollars?
2,800 square feet, sorry.
And I agree with Edwards and Harrington.
I agree with Harrington also.
Vice Mayor Harrington.
Well, I'm just want to make sure I understood. The direction then is to apply the sliding scale beginning at 2,800 square feet. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. Well, we're closing in. Oops. Yeah, non-residential retail office. So the range under discussion to date has been $4 to $7 a square foot. In the previous hearings, there was discussion in support of the lower end of the range and also towards the middle at $5.50 a square foot. We did develop the fee scenarios that you requested, and so now we need to try to hone in on that level for, again, this would be retail and office development, the impact fee for retail and office.
Oh, well, one of the things I think we learned from the Chamber of Commerce was an issue for Sonoma businesses is that we don't have enough office space and we don't have enough retail space to attract or sometimes even to retain companies to diversify the types of employment that exist here. And so I support incentivizing building those types of projects so that we can work on having the ability to recruit other people to bring their jobs and businesses here, especially the ability to diversify the economy so it's not all tourism but other types of industries. So I support a low fee.
Is low $4?
It is.
I still agree with $4.
Same here.
I'm fine with $4. I was $5.50 last time, but $4 would be fine.
4 is fine.
All right. Well, last but not least, hotels. So this would be an impact fee charged to new hotel development or expansions of hotels. The range that has been under discussion is $6 to $9 per square foot. And again, at the previous council discussion in March of this year, just different views were expressed in terms of what the appropriate fee level would be. So we tried to come up with, again, just some additional information in terms of what that fee might mean, and also just to use the example of the West Napa Street Hotel. The fee range that is under discussion to date goes from approximately $330,000 to $500,000.
So I'm going to veer from the recommendations on this one and say that I think it should be between $10 and $25 a square foot.
How would you pick a number between 10 and 25?
Oh, I'm just putting that out there because I would prefer it on the higher end, but I know that that's kind of high. So if like someone was more comfortable and could come to a consensus, but that is like the range that I would find acceptable. But obviously I would like to end up on the higher side of it.
The discussion that we had before, we were, what was it, at like $9 a square foot, so I agree. I think it should be higher. I don't know like you, I don't know what that might mean.
Well, just as a reminder, I think technically we could justify up to $90 a square foot, which I don't think, I mean, is any city even close to something that high? I haven't seen it, no. So even the range I gave would be a fraction of what's justifiable, right? Okay.
Talk about the ranges that we see in other communities. And a lot of, your neighboring areas, the fees are closer to the range that we suggested, which is due to a combination of factors such as their relative market strength. A lot of times it has to do with when they last updated their fees. More recently updated fees tend to be higher. In the Silicon Valley Peninsula area, we do see higher fees in the $25 per square foot range for office in particular. So it's not, your fee range is not unprecedented. And again, it's just policy choice based on your market strength, your need for affordable housing, and other considerations.
So my recommendation is to stick with the $6 to $9 range, because what we're talking about is we're moving forward with the tax or ballot initiative to raise the TOT to 15%, and I'd rather have 15% of hotel rooms that actually get built rather than a developer walking, because we're going to ask them for $90 a square foot for another fee, which doesn't make any sense to me.
I'll stick with my $7 recommendation because everything's relative. Earlier, before the room did fill up, we were talking about the price. When you do get too high up there, that will make the other hotels' price go up. So there's issues in my mind that I would like to stick with the 7.
I support a higher fee as well. I don't know what the right number is. I'd be happy to discuss it, but I think that, obviously the hotels have the highest impact of anything that we looked at in terms of the demand on affordable housing, and it's somewhat unfair to charge other people very close to the actual impact and then kind of give a pass to hotels.
I do need to just say as a clarification, hotels actually have a lower employment density than retail and office space.
But I'm just saying based on the Nexus study that we were presented with, the highest number given was for a hotel in terms of the dollars needed to mitigate the impact created by the hotel. Is that correct?
Has the workers in the hotel do have the lowest of the wage levels, but because of the employment density factor, though, it combines so that their per square foot level impact is lower than the other two land areas. So the maximum supported fee for the office and retail are higher than for the hotel.
What are they?
$184 a square foot and $282 per square foot.
Oh, okay.
Well, I still see the competing balance here with sort of a use to people who live here for office space for their businesses, retail spaces for more stores that are useful to us. So, if we were in a different market and we just had, it was the other way around and we, wanted more hotels, we could adjust it that way. But I think that right now, for us, office and retail is helpful. Hotels are useful, but as far as our economy goes and any hope of getting some more diverse businesses, so I see that having office and retail be lower and hotels be higher, that makes sense.
So we're looking for a number.
Well, just one thing I would maybe think for council, you may want to think about this is not the only time you're going to charge this fee. So you can set this fee and you can always adjust it as we can look at fees every year and you can adjust this fee. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, you do have to be careful that you don't set the fee too high. When I worked for the city of Davis, they had set a variety of major project development impact fees for all their commercial. And over a time period of about 15 years, they had very, very little development in their light industrial and commercial because their fees had set so high. And they actually ended up doing kind of a fee reduction for a period of time, and then were able to bring some development in. So there is a sweet spot. I don't know where that sweet spot is in this number, but just a word of caution, I think, to look at from going from 0 to nothing, and then potentially you could have an impact where maybe you don't have a project that financially pencils. And then you don't have the money coming in, and that's the downside as well. So again, don't know where that spot is, but something to consider.
If I can just add, there's about 14 vacant office buildings in Sonoma right now So if anybody's looking.
I think that depends on the type of the office space and what people are looking for. I mean, if we wanted to pick a number to begin with, I'd be comfortable with 15. I'd be comfortable with 20. If we didn't want to start too high, but I think the difference with the scenario with Davis is, you know, people just weren't building anything. Whereas something that's influenced me is I found out that Healdsburg is now talking about prohibiting the development of any hotels, any new hotels in their downtown area. And so, not that I want us to do that, but I think that when hotels happen, they're going to be few and far between, and it's not like we're in a position where we're desperately begging for people to come here and build them. It's just we want to be, you know, really smart about when it happens. Whereas, you know, things like retail is something that we're going to see more frequently. So that's why we picked $4. And if that isn't unhelpful, then we could talk about reducing it even more.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, I have a question for you. So when's the last time, besides the Marina Hotel, when's the last time we built a hotel in Sonoma? Is that the Lodge?
Well, there's MacArthur Place, and then there was an expansion of the El Pueblo. So
We haven't built a
I'm
new
not
hotel
sure
since-
what the timing of those are.
Thanks, Dave.
Well, I don't know if I'm comfortable with, I would say, you know, I'm just throwing a number out. I would say 10 or 11. And I don't know where that falls or how people feel comfortable with it or what that affects, how that affects the rest of the dynamics here. But
Well, I would rather see it at 15 probably.
I'm going to stick with 15.
I'm going to stick with 7. But this is going to be heard again, so this could be something that could just be direction back so we can get on to our meeting.
And that's fine. This is going to be heard again, and we can bring back a little more information in terms of just what those different alternatives amount to. And we're happy to do that. So we've made really great progress tonight, and I want to thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
thank you, David. Before we begin the next round, we're going to take a 5-minute break.
And Mayor Gamonte, can you adjourn the special meeting and then we will reconvene the regular meeting?
At this time, I'd like to adjourn the special meeting, and we will